Have you ever loved someone so much that you let them dismantle you piece by piece until there was nothing left but an empty shell? I did. I spent 10 agonizing years as Nolan Braden's devoted wife, swallowing his coldness, his resentment, and his undying obsession with his first love. When I took my last breath in a sterile white hospital room, completely alone, he wasn't there holding my hand. He was with her. But death wasn't the final curtain call I thought it would be. When I opened my eyes, the digital clock glared back at me, the calendar reading October 14th. 5 years earlier, the exact day he abandoned our engagement gala to run to her side. The day my humiliation became public spectacle. Only this time, I didn't fall to my knees. This time, I walked away. The beep of the heart monitor was the last sound I remembered. It wasn't frantic or dramatic. It was a slow, pathetic winding down. Much like my marriage to Nolan, the bone-deep chill of the hospital bed had seeped into my soul. I was 32, dying of a late-stage heart condition that had been ignored because I was too busy managing the chaotic, high-stakes life of the CEO of Braden Industries. Even on my deathbed, Nolan hadn't answered my calls. His assistant, a nervous young woman named Sarah, had stuttered over the phone. "Mr. Braden is currently unavailable, Mrs. Braden. Harper." Miss Evans had a panic attack at the airport. He went to calm her down. That was my last memory. The bitter taste of metallic failure on my tongue, the blinding white light, and then nothingness. So, when my eyes snapped open, the first thing that hit me wasn't the smell of antiseptic, but the heavy, intoxicating scent of Casablanca lilies. My vision blurred, then sharpened, taking in the vaulted ceiling of the Manhattan penthouse I hadn't lived in since the early days of our relationship. The morning sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden shadows across the Persian rug. I sat up, gasping, my hands flying to my chest. My heart was beating. It wasn't the weak, fluttery rhythm of a dying organ, but a strong, steady thump. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer pale and vain, streaked. They were youthful, manicured, trembling. Snatching my phone from the nightstand, I stared at the screen. October 14th. I stopped breathing. This couldn't be real. October 14th was the day of our lavish engagement gala at the plaza. It was also the day Nolan's first love, Harper Evans, returned from Paris. In my previous life, just 3 hours before we were supposed to greet 500 of New York's elite, Nolan had received a tearful phone call from Harper. She had lost her luggage. She was overwhelmed. She needed him. In that life I had cried. I had blocked the door, clutching the lapels of his custom Tom Ford suit, begging him not to leave me alone to face the media and his judgmental family. I remembered the look in his eyes that day, pure, unadulterated disgust. "You're pathetic, Cheyenne," he had sneered, peeling my fingers off his jacket. "Harper actually needs me. All you need is the Braden name." He had left me sobbing on the floor. A sharp knock on the bedroom door shattered the memory. "Cheyenne, are you dressed?" It was him. Nolan's voice, deep, impatient, carrying that familiar edge of irritation. The sound of it sent a visceral shockwave through my newly resurrected body. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel the desperate yearning that had defined my 20s. I felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. "Come in," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The door swung open, and there he stood. Nolan Braden. Broad shoulders, sharp jawline, thick dark hair perfectly styled. He looked exactly as he had 5 years ago. Breathtakingly handsome and completely miserable in my presence. He was already in his tuxedo trousers and a crisp white shirt, fiddling with his cufflinks. He didn't even look at me. "Listen, there's been a change of plans," he said, his tone brisk, businesslike. He finally glanced up, his phone buzzing incessantly in his hand. "Harper just landed at JFK. She's in a state. I need to go get her." I sat on the edge of the bed, the silk sheets pooling around my waist. I waited for the panic to rise, for the urge to scream and beg. It never came. I looked at the man who had let me die alone. The man who had hated me for tying him down out of obligation to his grandfather's wishes. All right, I said calmly. Nolan paused, his fingers freezing on his cufflink. His brow furrowed in utter confusion. He had been bracing for a fight. He had his cruel rebuttals locked and loaded. All right, he repeated, genuinely thrown. I'm leaving, Cheyenne. I won't be at the pre-gala photo shoot. I might even be late for the reception. I heard you, I replied, standing up. I walked past him, feeling a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie. You should hurry. Traffic to JFK is terrible this time of day. Tell Harper I hope she finds her bags. I walked into the massive walk-in closet and pulled out a sleek, hard-shell suitcase. Behind me, Nolan stood in the doorway of the closet, staring at me as if I had sprouted a second head. What are you doing? He demanded, his voice dropping an octave. Packing, I said, tossing a few comfortable sweaters and jeans into the suitcase. I didn't touch the designer gowns he had bought me to play the part of the perfect corporate wife. I only took the things I had purchased with my own money from my days as an aspiring gallery curator. You can't pack now. We have the gala in 3 hours. He snapped, his irritation returning, masking his confusion. Just because I have to step out doesn't mean you get to throw one of your tantrums. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound loud and final in the quiet room. I turned to face him, looking him dead in the eye. There is no gala, Nolan, I said softly. Not for me anyway. I'm leaving. Leaving for where? The plaza? Leaving you? I corrected. I walked over to the dresser, unclasped the blinding 3-carat diamond engagement ring from my finger, and set it down on the mahogany surface with a quiet clink. Go to Harper. You don't have to pretend anymore. You're free. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. Nolan stared at the ring on the dresser, then back at me, a muscle feathered in his jaw. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Doubt? Panic? But it was quickly swallowed by his trademark arrogance. This is a new low, even for you, Cheyenne, he scoffed, crossing his arms. Using threats to manipulate me into staying? Fine. If you want to cancel the event of the season and humiliate both our families because you're jealous of a friend in crisis, go ahead. Call my grandfather and tell him yourself. He thought it was a bluff. Of course he did. I had spent years being the submissive, accommodating partner, terrified of losing him. I already did. I lied smoothly. I hadn't called his grandfather yet, but I would the moment I left this building. You don't need to worry about the PR fallout. I'll take the blame. I'll say we realized we were incompatible. You can be the tragic hero who tried to make it work, and I'll be the fickle woman who walked away. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. Now, if you'll excuse me. I walked past him, my shoulder brushing against his arm. He didn't move to stop me. I think he was paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the situation. As I walked down the long hallway toward the front door, I heard his voice, loud and defensive, echo from the bedroom. I'll be back by 6, Cheyenne. You better have your dress on. I closed the heavy oak door behind me, stepping into the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the penthouse, my knees gave out. I sank to the floor of the elevator, a ragged breath escaping my lips. I was shaking, but not from sorrow. It was adrenaline. It was the terrifying, exhilarating rush of taking a sledgehammer to a destiny that had once killed me. When I reached the lobby, Thomas, the elderly doorman who had always been kind to me, tipped his hat. Heading to the plaza early, Miss Davies? He asked, noticing I was dressed in simple jeans and a trench coat rather than a ball gown. Actually, Thomas, I'm heading out of town for a bit, I smiled, slipping $100 bill into his hand. Take care of yourself. My first call was to Benjamin Hollins, an old college friend who had gone on to become one of the most ruthless family law attorneys in Manhattan. When he answered, he sounded surprised. Cheyenne, shouldn't you be getting your hair lacquered into a helmet right about now? Ben, I need you to draft a separation agreement and a formal dissolution of the engagement, I said, hailing a yellow cab. I want nothing from the Braden estate. No alimony, no settlement, nothing. Just a clean break. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Cheyenne, are you safe? Did he hurt you? No, I said, staring out the window as the city blurred past. He just didn't love me. And I finally realized that's enough of a reason to leave. I'm sending you everything you need. Please, move fast. I checked into the Greenwich Hotel under my maiden name. I turned off my phone, ordered a ludicrous amount of room service, and drew a hot bath. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't check my email to see if Nolan's mother needed me to host a charity luncheon. I didn't obsess over whether Nolan would come home for dinner. I just existed. I turned my phone back on at 10:00 p.m. The screen lit up like a Christmas tree. 47 missed calls. 112 unread messages. Most were from Nolan's assistant, a few from his furious mother, and several from Liam, Nolan's best friend and business partner. Surprisingly, there was only one text from Nolan himself, sent at 7:15 p.m. Nolan, where the hell are you? The press is downstairs. Stop this childish game and get to the plaza right now. I didn't reply. Instead, I clicked on the news app. The headline of page 6 was already glaring back at me. Runaway bride or runaway groom? No show at Brooke's engagement gala. The article detailed how neither Nolan Braden nor his fiancée, Cheyenne Davies, had appeared at their own party. Hundreds of guests had been sent home. But the kicker was a blurry paparazzi photo attached to the article. It showed Nolan outside JFK Airport, wrapping his suit jacket around a fragile-looking Harper Evans, who was burying her face in his chest. I smiled. In my past life, that photo had leaked days later, and I had spent hours locked in a bathroom, crying until my eyes were swollen shut. Looking at it now, I felt absolutely nothing. They deserved each other. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Liam. I answered it. Cheyenne? Thank God. Liam exhaled loudly. Are you okay? Where are you? It's a total bloodbath over here. Arthur Sr. is threatening to strip Nolan of his CEO title. I'm fine, Liam, I said, pouring myself a glass of complimentary wine. I'm perfectly fine. What happened? Nolan showed up to the plaza at 8 o'clock, looking like a maniac, asking if you were there. When we realized you were gone, he completely lost it. He tore apart the bridal suite looking for you. I frowned. That wasn't right. Nolan shouldn't have cared. He should have been relieved. He shouldn't be looking for me, I told Liam firmly. He should be with Harper. Tell him my lawyer will be in touch on Monday. Good night, Liam. I hung up, blocked Liam's number, and finally, for the first time in a decade, I slept peacefully. 3 weeks passed. In the world of high society, 3 weeks is enough time for a scandal to turn into an established legend. The narrative in the press, carefully curated by Benjamin Hollins before the Braden family PR machine could spin it, was simple. Cheyenne Davies had realized the marriage was a mistake and walked away to pursue her own passions. Because I had explicitly refused a financial settlement, their usual tactic of painting me as a gold digger fell flat. I rented a bright, airy loft in Brooklyn and used my savings to lease a small, struggling independent art gallery in Williamsburg. It was gritty, raw, and exactly what I wanted. In my past life, Nolan had laughed at the idea. Art is an investment, Cheyenne. Not a hobby for bored housewives, he had said. Now I was working 12-hour days, curating local artists, painting the walls myself, and thriving. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the past finally caught up to me. I was on a ladder, hanging a massive abstract canvas, wearing paint-splattered overalls, and a messy bun. The bell above the gallery door chimed. We're closed for renovations, but we open next. I started, looking over my shoulder. The words died in my throat. Standing in the doorway, dripping wet and looking uncharacteristically disheveled, was Nolan. He was wearing a dark overcoat, his hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. He looked thinner, his cheekbones sharper, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. He didn't look like the untouchable CEO anymore. He looked exhausted. He stared at me, his eyes sweeping over my paint-stained clothes, the ladder, the vibrant art on the walls. He looked utterly bewildered, as if he had stepped onto an alien planet. "So," Nolan said, his voice hoarse, "this is where you've been hiding." I climbed down the ladder slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. "I haven't been hiding, Nolan. I filed the paperwork. You know exactly where I am. Benjamin sent the final dissolution documents to your office yesterday." He flinched at the mention of the lawyer. He stepped further into the gallery, closing the door behind him. The sound of the rain was muffled, leaving a heavy, tense silence between us. "I refused to sign them," he stated, his jaw tightening. "This has gone on long enough, Cheyenne. I let you have your space. I let you throw your tantrum. You made your point. You humiliated me in front of the entire city. Are you satisfied? Can we go home now?" I stared at him, genuinely fascinated. The arrogance was staggering. He truly believed I had blown up my entire life just to teach him a lesson. "I'm not throwing a tantrum, Nolan," I said gently, treating him like a confused child. "I'm moving on. I don't love you anymore." Those words seemed to strike him physically. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "You don't just stop loving someone in a day, Cheyenne. I know you. You're obsessed with me. You've spent 5 years trying to be the perfect wife." "And I was dying doing it," I murmured, the truth of my past life bleeding into my words. I shook my head, clearing the dark memories. "How is Harper? Is she settled in?" At the mention of her name, a dark cloud passed over his face. He looked away, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. The twist of the knife was that I already knew exactly how things were playing out. Without me to buffer his life, Nolan was drowning. I had managed his demanding, critical grandfather. I had planned his meals, organized his schedule, and smoothed over his abrasive personality with his board members. Harper was a beautiful, ethereal muse, but she was useless in the real world. In the past 3 weeks, according to the society blogs, Harper had moved into his penthouse, but instead of the romantic reunion Nolan had likely envisioned, it was a disaster. Harper was needy, constantly requiring reassurance, demanding his time when he was trying to put out the fires my departure had started at Braden Industries. "Harper is fine," he gritted out, though his tone suggested otherwise. "She's staying at the penthouse for now. Her apartment in Paris fell through." "That's nice," I smiled, picking up a paintbrush. "You finally got the girl you wanted. I'm happy for you, truly. Now, please sign the papers, Nolan. It's embarrassing for both of us to drag this out." "I'm not signing them," he suddenly shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He closed the distance between us, grabbing my wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was desperate. "My grandfather is furious. The board is breathing down my neck. You were supposed to be the stabilizing factor, Cheyenne. You promised him you would stand by me." I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back up to his eyes. They were wild, practically pleading, but entirely selfish. He didn't miss me. He missed what I did for him. "I retract the promise," I said coldly, yanking my arm free. "I am not your shock absorber anymore. If your life is falling apart because I'm not there to manage it, that sounds like a you problem." Nolan stared at his empty hand, breathing heavily. He looked up at me, and for the very first time in my memory, in both of my lives, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He was looking at me not as an annoying obligation, but as a person he had severely underestimated. "You're really not coming back," he whispered, the realization finally breaking through his ego. "No," I replied, turning my back on him to face the canvas again. "Turn off the lights on your way out, Nolan. I have work to do." I didn't turn around. I heard him stand there for a long time, the heavy silence punctuated only by the rain outside. Finally, I heard the soft click of the gallery door opening and then closing. He was gone. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. In my past life, Nolan Braden had destroyed me. But in this one, he was about to realize that he had handed me the sledgehammer, and his perfect, curated life was the glass house. The opening night of the canvas house was nothing short of a spectacle, but unlike the sterile, meticulously orchestrated Braden family events I had spent years organizing, this was a living, breathing entity. The gallery hummed with raw energy, the walls lined with provocative, visceral pieces from undiscovered Brooklyn artists. There were no string quartets playing Mozart. Instead, an indie jazz band set a low, thumping rhythm in the corner. There was no champagne served in crystal flutes, just good, strong red wine in stemless glasses. I stood near the center of the room, wearing a tailored, emerald green velvet suit that I actually liked, rather than the restrictive pastel gowns Nolan's mother used to force upon me. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt completely comfortable in my own skin. "You look like you're plotting world domination, Cheyenne." I turned to see Sebastian Pierce leaning against a stark white pillar. Sebastian was a notoriously cutthroat art critic and a prolific private investor. He was also everything Nolan was not: perceptive, grounded, and possessing a sharp, self-deprecating wit. We had crossed paths a few times during my old life, but he had always looked at me with a mixture of pity and boredom. Now his dark eyes held genuine respect. "Just plotting how to sell that massive mixed media piece in the corner." I smiled, clinking my glass against his. "Already sold," Sebastian said smoothly, taking a sip of his wine. "I bought it 10 minutes ago. Your curation is aggressive." "I like it. It has teeth. Much like your recent departure from the Upper East Side's most suffocating dynasty." I chuckled, though I felt a brief flutter of anxiety. "I'm trying to keep my personal life out of the gallery's narrative, Sebastian." "Impossible," he replied, leaning in closer. "Your narrative is what brought half these people here tonight. They came to see the ruined, jilted ex-fiancé of Nolan Braden. But they're staying, and they're buying, because they found a powerhouse instead." He paused, his gaze shifting over my shoulder toward the entrance. "Speaking of your personal life, it seems a ghost has decided to crash the party." My spine stiffened. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, the subtle dropping of voices, the turning of heads gave it away. I slowly turned. Nolan stood at the entrance. He looked wildly out of place in his rigid, charcoal gray bespoke suit amidst the sea of bohemian chic. But it wasn't his clothes that caught my attention. It was his demeanor. The untouchable aura of the billionaire CEO was fracturing. He looked haggard, his jaw clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter. And clinging tightly to his arm, looking like a frightened deer caught in the headlights, was Harper Evans. Harper was undeniably beautiful, in a fragile porcelain doll sort of way. She wore a pale pink silk dress that clung to her waif-like figure, her blonde hair falling in soft waves. But her eyes darted around the room nervously, overwhelmed by the loud music and the lack of traditional high society deference. "Shall I have security escort them out?" Sebastian asked, his voice dropping to a protective murmur. "No," I said, taking a steadying breath. "Let them look. They have no power here." I watched as Nolan's eyes scanned the room, desperately searching the crowd until they locked onto mine. The moment he saw me standing next to Sebastian, a dark, volatile emotion crossed his face. He began weaving through the crowd toward us, Harper trailing behind him like an anchor. "Cheyenne," Nolan said as he approached, his voice tight. He didn't even acknowledge Sebastian. "Nolan." "Harper." I nodded politely, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." Harper offered a weak, trembling smile. "Nolan thought it would be good to support you, to show there are no hard feelings." Her voice was breathy, high-pitched. In my past life, that voice had haunted my nightmares. Now, it just sounded profoundly irritating. "How generous," I replied dryly. "The gallery looks nice," Nolan offered, though he was glaring at Sebastian. "Pierce, I didn't realize you slummed it in Williamsburg." "I go where the talent is, Braden," Sebastian replied easily, not intimidated in the slightest. "Cheyenne has a brilliant eye, something you clearly overlooked." Nolan flushed angrily, taking a step forward. Mind your business, Pierce. Nolan, please, Harper whimpered, tugging on his sleeve. It's too loud in here. My head is pounding. Can we just go? You said we would only stay for 5 minutes. Nolan looked down at her. And for a split second, I saw it, the flash of sheer exhaustion, the burden of constantly managing her fragility. It was the exact same look I used to get when I tried to talk to him about my heart condition. Karma was working faster than I had anticipated. Give me a minute, Harper, he snapped, harsher than I had ever heard him speak to her. Harper recoiled, her eyes welling with instant tears. Nolan turned back to me, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. My grandfather called an emergency board meeting today. He's threatening a vote of no confidence. He says my personal life is destabilizing the company's stock. And why are you telling me this? I asked, taking a slow sip of my wine. Because you're the only one who can talk him down, Nolan pleaded, the arrogance finally stripping away to reveal the desperate man underneath. Call him, Cheyenne. Tell him we're working things out amicably. Tell him you're coming back as a consultant for the charitable foundation. Anything. I stared at him, marveling at the audacity. He was drowning in the mess he created, and he expected me to jump in and be his life raft, just like I always had. Nolan, I said softly, stepping closer so only he could hear. I am not your wife. I am not your employee. And I am certainly not your savior. Deal with your own grandfather. And deal with your girlfriend. She looks like she's about to faint. I turned away, placing my hand lightly on Sebastian's arm. Come on, Sebastian. There's a collector from Chicago I want you to meet. As we walked away, I heard Harper break into a muffled sob, and Nolan swearing under his breath. The unraveling of Nolan Braden had officially begun, and I wasn't going to lift a single finger to stop it. 2 months later, the chill of winter had settled over New York City. The canvas house had become a resounding success, outperforming even my wildest projections. My days were filled with studio visits, managing artists, and fierce negotiations. The hollow, aching void in my chest that had defined my 20s was entirely gone, replaced by the fulfilling exhaustion of building an empire with my own 2 hands. The pinnacle of the winter art season was the Metropolitan Arts Gala. In my past life, this was an event I dreaded. I would spend weeks agonizing over a dress, only for Nolan to barely look at me, spending the entire evening networking and leaving me to make polite small talk with the wives of his rivals. This time, I was attending not as an accessory but as an invited dignitary. I arrived with Sebastian. I wore a backless midnight blue gown that draped over my figure like liquid glass, my hair swept up in a sharp, modern style. When we stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs erupted. The press had eaten up the narrative of the scorned fiancé turned art world powerhouse. Smile, darling, Sebastian whispered, placing a warm hand on the small of my back as we paused for the cameras. You own the city tonight. We made our way into the grand ballroom. It was a sea of diamonds, velvet, and ego. I immediately began working the room, greeting museum directors, wealthy patrons, and critics. I felt electric, alive, utterly untouchable, until the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. I didn't need to look. But I did. Nolan and Harper had arrived. If the gallery opening had shown cracks in their facade, tonight, the entire structure looked ready to collapse. Nolan looked gaunt, his eyes hollow. His bespoke suit seemed to hang off him slightly. The rumors circulating the financial district were vicious. Braden Industries stock had taken a massive hit. Arthur Braden Sr. was reportedly barely speaking to his grandson, and Nolan was working 20-hour days to keep the board at bay. Harper, however, was the real tragedy. She was draped in a violently expensive, ostentatious diamond necklace that practically screamed, "Look at me. I won." But she looked utterly miserable. The elite society wives, who had once tolerated me out of respect for the Braden name, were brutal. They shunned Harper openly, forming tight circles and turning their backs when she approached. Midway through the evening, the charity auction began. Sebastian and I took our seats at a prominent table near the front. Nolan and Harper were seated 2 tables over. I could feel Nolan's eyes burning into the side of my head, but I refused to look. The auctioneer presented a stunning, chaotic contemporary piece by a rising Brazilian artist. I knew the artist personally. The piece was brilliant, but mathematically, its market value cap was around $50,000. "Do we bid?" Sebastian murmured. "No," I whispered back. "It's beautiful, but it's a volatile investment. Bidding starts at 20,000, the auctioneer announced. Paddles went up. 30,000. 40,000. Suddenly, a high, reedy voice rang out. 50,000! I glanced over. Harper was holding her paddle high, a defiant, almost manic smile on her face. She was glaring directly at me. It was a pathetic power play. She wanted to prove she belonged here, that she had the Braden wealth at her disposal to buy whatever she wanted. Nolan reached out, grabbing her wrist, his face pale. "Harper, put it down. We don't need that." I could read his lips. "I want it, Nal," she hissed back, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Are you saying I can't have it?" The auctioneer, sensing blood in the water, looked around. 50,000 going once. Do I hear 60? Sebastian leaned over. "Want to have some fun?" he whispered, a wicked glint in his eye. Before I could stop him, Sebastian raised his paddle. 60,000. Harper's face twisted in fury. She yanked her arm out of Nolan's grasp and threw her paddle up. 75,000! Gasps rippled through the crowd. Nolan buried his face in his hands. He knew, just as half the room knew, that she was making a fool of him. She was bidding against a renowned art critic on a piece she knew nothing about, purely out of spite. Sebastian looked at me, raising an eyebrow. I gave him a microscopic shake of my head. Let her hang herself. 75,000 going once. Twice. Sold. The auctioneer boomed. A smattering of polite, incredibly condescending applause followed. Harper looked triumphant for about 3 seconds, until she noticed the smirks on the faces of the women at the next table. She hadn't won a prize. She had just publicly bled her boyfriend's heavily scrutinized bank account for a piece of canvas, proving how wildly out of her depth she was. Later, I excused myself to the powder room. The long hallway was quiet, lined with towering floral arrangements. As I rounded a corner, a shadow detached itself from the wall. "You did that on purpose," Nolan said, his voice ragged. I stopped. He looked wrecked. The dark circles under his eyes were prominent, his tie loosened. He smelled of scotch and profound regret. "Did what?" I asked calmly. "Let Pierce bait her," he sneered, stepping closer, blocking my path. "You humiliated her in front of everyone. Are you enjoying this, Cheyenne? Watching my life fall apart?" I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Your life is falling apart because of your own choices, Nolan. You chose the woman who throws tantrums at airports over the woman who ran your entire life. You chose a fantasy over reality. Don't blame me because the reality of Harper Evans is financially and emotionally bankrupting you." He flinched as if I had struck him. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a hollow shell. "I miss you," he whispered. The words sounded like they were torn from his throat, bloody and jagged. "God, Cheyenne, I miss you. I didn't realize. I didn't know what you were carrying for me. The board, my grandfather, the press. You shielded me from all of it. I'm drowning." I looked at the man I had once loved so desperately that my heart had literally given out. He wasn't apologizing for hurting me. He wasn't saying he loved me. He was apologizing because his life was harder without me serving him. "You don't miss me, Nolan," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You miss the convenience of me. You miss the human shield. But that girl is dead. She died the minute you walked out of the penthouse on October 14th. I stepped around him. He didn't try to stop me. "Cheyenne, please," he called out, his voice cracking. I didn't look back. "Have a good night, Nolan. Try to keep Harper away from the silent auction." Spring arrived, washing the city in vibrant colors. With the change in season came a newfound desperation from the Braden camp. The dissolution papers remained unsigned on Nolan's desk. My lawyer, Benjamin Hollins, advised me to take it to court to force a judge's hand. But I held off. I knew Nolan. A forced signature would result in a messy, protracted legal battle fueled by his bruised ego. I needed him to surrender willingly. I didn't have to wait long. Harper forced his hand for me. It started with a whisper campaign. Anonymous tips were sent to major art blogs claiming that the canvas house was selling forged pieces, specifically targeting the Brazilian artist's work we had featured. Then came the random health and safety inspections at the gallery, triggered by anonymous complaints. I knew exactly who was behind it. Harper was cornered. Nolan was growing colder to her by the day, his regret over losing me mutating into resentment toward her. She thought if she could destroy my new life, she could prove to Nolan that I was a fraud, bringing me back down to her level. She was incredibly stupid. The climax of her pathetic sabotage occurred on a rainy Tuesday. I arrived at the gallery to find the landlord, a nervous man named Mr. Rossi, pacing outside. "Miss Davies, I am so sorry," he babbled as I unlocked the doors. "But I received an offer on the building. A cash offer, double the market value. The buyer wants to bulldoze and build condos. There's a clause in your lease. If the building is sold for redevelopment, you have 30 days to vacate." Ah, I froze. "Who is the buyer, Mr. Rossi?" "An LLC. Horizon Holdings," he said, avoiding my eyes. I walked into my office, shutting the door. I pulled out my laptop and did a quick search. Horizon Holdings was a shell company, but with a quick call to Benjamin Hollins and some legal probing, the veil was lifted in under an hour. The LLC was registered to an offshore account controlled by Harper Evans, using funds directly transferred from a joint account she recently opened with Nolan. She was trying to buy my building to evict me, and she was using Nolan's money to do it. I didn't call Nolan. I called his grandfather. Arthur Braden Sr. was a terrifying patriarch, a man who viewed emotion as a weakness and failure as a sin. When I arrived at his sprawling estate in the Hamptons, he was in his greenhouse, pruning orchids. "Cheyenne," he grunted, not looking up. "I wondered when you'd come crawling back to negotiate." "I'm not here to negotiate, Arthur," I said, standing tall. "I'm here to do you a favor. Out of respect for the time I spent in your family." I handed him a thick manila folder. "This is proof that Harper Evans is using Braden family capital to fund a shell corporation for the sole purpose of conducting a petty, illegal sabotage campaign against my business. If this leaks to the press, and I assure you, if she proceeds, the SEC will look into Nolan's mismanagement of company funds. Braden Industries stock will tank beyond recovery." Arthur paused. He wiped his hands on a towel and opened the folder. As his eyes scanned the documents, his face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He didn't care about my gallery. He cared about the Braden name, and Harper was smearing it in mud. "That foolish, reckless boy," Arthur breathed, his voice vibrating with lethal fury. He looked at me, his eyes calculating. "What do you want, Cheyenne? Money? A seat on the board?" "I want the dissolution papers signed by 5 o'clock today," I said simply. "And I want Harper Evans restrained from ever coming within 50 feet of my business again. You handle your grandson. I wash my hands of this." I left the estate without another word. At 4:00 p.m., I was sitting in the gallery with Sebastian, going over a new exhibition layout, when the door burst open. Nolan practically tore into the room. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash. He was panting, his hair wild. Clutching a manila envelope, he marched up to my desk and threw the envelope down. The signed dissolution papers spilled out. "She took my money," he gasped, leaning heavily against the desk. He looked physically ill. My grandfather called me into his office. He froze my accounts. "He's taking away my CEO title pending a behavioral review." He showed me the transfers. "Harper, she stole from me to try and ruin you." I looked at him, feeling absolutely no pity. "I warned you, Nolan. The reality of her is expensive." "I kicked her out," he said, his voice cracking, tears finally spilling over his lashes. The great Nolan Braden, broken and weeping in my art gallery. I threw her out on the street. I told her I never wanted to see her again. It was all a lie, Cheyenne. All those years I thought she was this perfect, misunderstood victim. She's a parasite. And I threw you away for her. He fell to his knees in front of my desk, grasping the edge of the wood. Please, Cheyenne. I signed the papers because my grandfather forced me. But please don't file them. Give me one more chance. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll step down from the company completely. We can start over. I stood up, looking down at the man who had let me die alone in a hospital room in another life, the man who had sneered at me as I begged him to stay. Sebastian, I called out calmly without breaking eye contact with Nolan. Could you call building security? We have a trespasser. Nolan's head snapped up, utter devastation contorting his features. Cheyenne, no. You can't be this cold. I'm not cold, Nolan, I replied, picking up the signed papers and slipping them carefully into my briefcase. I'm just entirely, completely done with you. You chose your path 5 years ago. Now, you get to walk it alone. The security guards arrived a moment later. Nolan didn't fight them. He let them pull him to his feet, his eyes locked on mine, filled with a bottomless, soul-crushing regret. As they led him out the door, into the bustling Brooklyn afternoon, I knew I would never see him again. The ghost of my past life was finally laid to rest. I turned back to Sebastian, who was watching me with a mixture of awe and deep affection. Now, I smiled, feeling the weight of the world lift entirely off my shoulders. Where were we on the new exhibition? A year. It is astonishing how much of your life you can rebuild in 365 days when you are no longer carrying the dead weight of a man who resents you. The Canvas House was no longer just a gallery in Williamsburg. It was a cultural institution. I had secured a sprawling, multi-level warehouse in Chelsea, funded entirely by a syndicate of investors led by Sebastian Pierce and a notoriously reclusive British billionaire named Alistair Sterling. Alistair, a man whose private collection rivaled small national museums, had attended our winter exhibition and immediately recognized the raw, uncurated truth in the artists I represented. He didn't just buy art, he bought into my vision. My life was a whirlwind of international flights, high-stakes auctions in Geneva, and late-night dinners in Paris with artists who viewed the world in vibrant, chaotic strokes. I was Cheyenne Davies, a woman who had forged her own kingdom out of the ashes of a spectacular public humiliation. Meanwhile, the Braden dynasty was crumbling into dust. The financial pages documented the slow, agonizing demise of Nolan Braden almost daily. After Arthur Braden Sr. froze Nolan out and stripped him of his CEO title, the board of directors initiated a ruthless corporate restructuring. The scandal with Harper's Shell Company had triggered an SEC investigation. Though Nolan was cleared of criminal embezzlement, he had been too blinded by Harper's manipulations to realize she was using his personal accounts to fund her sabotage. The sheer negligence proved fatal to his career. He was relegated to a silent shareholder, a ghost haunting the periphery of the empire his grandfather had built. I was sitting in my glass-walled office in Chelsea, reviewing the catalog for our upcoming Venice Biennale exhibition, when my assistant, a razor-sharp girl named Maya, knocked on the door. Cheyenne, there's a Liam Hollins here to see you, Maya said, her brow furrowed. He doesn't have an appointment. And he looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Isaiah, setting my pen down. Liam. Nolan's former best friend and ex-business partner. In my past life, Liam had always treated me like a pesky little sister who was constantly getting in the way of his and Nolan's frat boy legacy. Send him in, I replied. Liam walked into my office, and I barely recognized him. The swaggering, arrogant Wall Street golden boy was gone. He wore a rumpled suit, his posture slumped. He looked around my immaculate, sun-drenched office with a mixture of awe and deep, uncomfortable regret. Cheyenne, he breathed, sinking into the leather chair opposite my desk. You look incredible. What do you want, Liam? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. I have a flight to Milan in 4 hours. Liam swallowed hard, rubbing his hands over his face. It's Nolan. I didn't know who else to come to. His grandfather passed away last week. Massive stroke. I felt a brief flicker of surprise, but no sorrow. Arthur Sr. was a tyrant who had enabled Nolan's worst traits. I saw the obituary in the Times. My condolences. But that doesn't explain why you're in my office. Nolan has completely lost it, Cheyenne, Liam said, his voice cracking with genuine desperation. After Arthur died, the board forced a buyout. They erased the Braden name from the holding company entirely. Nolan is officially out. He's locked himself in the penthouse. He's drinking himself to death. He won't answer his phone. He fired the staff. He's completely alone. He has Harper, I pointed out coldly. Liam let out a dark, bitter laugh. Harper? Harper left him the second the SEC investigation hit the papers, and his accounts were temporarily frozen. She cleaned out whatever she could carry and moved to Los Angeles with some tech venture capitalist. She abandoned him when the money stopped flowing freely. I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers, and looked at Liam. And you expect me to do what? Exactly? Rush to his side? Nurse him back to health? Liam, I am his ex-fiancée, a woman he publicly humiliated and emotionally abused for years. I am not his mother, and I am certainly not his savior. You're the only one who ever truly cared about him, Liam pleaded, leaning forward. He pushed you away because he was a blind, arrogant fool. But you knew him better than anyone. Just go talk to him, please, before he does something irreversible. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. If you are worried he is a danger to himself, Liam, call a psychiatrist. Call an ambulance, I said, my voice unwavering. But do not ever come into my place of business and ask me to sacrifice my peace for a man who gladly watched me drown. Tell Nolan I wish him well. But my door is permanently closed. Liam looked at me, seeing the absolute icy finality in my eyes. He nodded slowly, a look of profound defeat washing over him. He stood up and walked out of my office, taking the last remnants of my past life with him. The twist in the knife came 3 months later, delivered not by Nolan, but by the very woman who had orchestrated his downfall. Harper Evans, ever the opportunist, published a tell-all memoir titled The Braden Betrayal. It was an instant bestseller, serialized in every major gossip magazine from New York to London. In it, she painted herself as the naive, innocent muse who was manipulated by a controlling, abusive billionaire. But it was Chapter 4 that sent shockwaves through the city. I was sitting in Sebastian's expansive Tribeca loft, curled up on his velvet sofa with a cup of black coffee, when he tossed the freshly printed magazine onto the coffee table in front of me. You might want to read this, Sebastian murmured, sitting beside me and pressing a kiss to my temple. It seems your favorite parasite has finally shown her true colors to the world. I picked up the magazine. The headline screamed, The Truth About the Airport. Why Nathaniel Brooks Really Left His Bride. I began to read, and as my eyes scanned the glossy pages, my blood ran cold. According to Harper's own ghost-written admission, the phone call she made to Nolan on October 14th, the day of our engagement gala, the day I died in my past life, was not about a panic attack over lost luggage. I knew he was slipping away, Harper wrote. I knew he was going to marry Cheyenne and lock me out of his life forever. So, from the Charles de Gaulle Airport lounge, I called him. I was hysterical. I told him I was pregnant. I told him if he didn't come to me immediately, I would end my life and the baby's. It was a desperate lie to save our love. A fake pregnancy. A suicide threat. The magazine slipped from my fingers, landing on the rug with a soft thud. In my previous life, I had spent 10 years believing Nolan left me at the altar, simply because he preferred her company over mine. I had withered away, consumed by the inadequacy of not being enough to keep him in the room. But the truth was far more sinister and far more pathetic. He hadn't left out of sheer romance. He had been trapped by a vicious, calculated manipulation. "Hey," Sebastian said softly, turning my face toward his. His dark eyes were filled with fierce protectiveness. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I breathed, the shock giving way to a profound, hollow realization. He threw his entire life away for a phantom. A lie. He made his choice. Cheyenne, Sebastian reminded me gently. He chose to believe the lie because he wanted an excuse to escape his responsibilities. He chose his ego over your loyalty. Sebastian was right, The revelation didn't make me pity Nolan. It only cemented my absolute disgust. He was so weak, so easily led by his own vanity and a pretty face, that he was willing to destroy a loyal woman for a manipulative one. That evening, a torrential downpour slammed into Manhattan, turning the streets into slick black rivers. I stayed late at the Chelsea Gallery, finalizing the lighting for a new sculpture exhibit. The security guards had already locked the front doors, but the loading dock in the back remained open for a late delivery. I heard the heavy steel door of the loading dock creak open, followed by wet, heavy footsteps echoing against the concrete floors. I stepped out of my office, a reprimand for the late delivery drivers on my lips. It wasn't a driver. Standing amidst the towering, abstract metal sculptures soaked to the bone and shivering violently was Nolan Braden. He was unrecognizable. The tailored suits and $1,000 haircuts were gone. He wore a faded, rain-soaked trench coat, his hair unkempt and plastered to his skull. His face was gaunt, the cheekbones jutting out sharply, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. He looked like a beggar who had wandered in from the storm. He saw me, and a ragged, broken sob tore from his throat. He fell to his knees on the hard concrete, right there in the middle of my gallery. "Cheyenne," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper against the sound of the rain lashing the windows. I didn't move. I stood 10 feet away, my arms crossed, perfectly immaculate in my tailored silk trousers and cashmere sweater. The physical distance between us was nothing compared to the cosmic chasm that now separated our lives. "How did you get in here, Nolan?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly in the cavernous space. "Liam told me about the book." He wept, crawling forward a few inches, his hands flat on the wet concrete. "Harper's book. The pregnancy. The lie. I didn't know, Cheyenne. I swear to God, I didn't know. She told me she lost the baby a week later. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I had to take care of her." "You thought you were playing the tragic hero," I corrected him, my tone utterly devoid of sympathy. "You wanted to be the savior, and in doing so, you gladly made me the villain." "I was a fool," he screamed, hitting his fists against the floor. The sound was pathetic, the tantrum of a broken child. "I lost everything. My grandfather, my company, my legacy, and you. I lost you. You were the only real thing in my life, Cheyenne. You were the only one who never lied to me." He looked up at me, his face streaming with a mixture of rain and tears. The sheer agony in his eyes was staggering. This was his rock bottom. He was finally seeing the full, unadulterated reality of what he had thrown away. "Please," he begged, his voice dropping to a hoarse, desperate rasp. "Please, Cheyenne. Just forgive me. Just tell me you forgive me so I can sleep. I can't close my eyes without seeing your face when I walked out of that penthouse. The way you looked at me. The way you just let me go. It's killing me." I stared down at him. In my past life, his tears would have broken me. I would have dropped to the floor, cradled his head, and promised to fix it all. I would have let him bleed me dry all over again. But my heart beat with a steady, fierce rhythm now. It beat for me. "I do forgive you, Nolan," I said softly, the words dropping like stones into the quiet gallery. A flash of desperate hope ignited in his eyes. He started to rise, reaching a shaking hand out toward me. I took a step back, out of his reach. "I forgive you," I repeated, my gaze locking him in place. because holding on to anger for a ghost is a waste of my energy. But forgiveness does not mean access. You are a stranger to me now, a cautionary tale. I don't love you. I don't hate you. I feel absolutely nothing for you. The hope in his eyes shattered, replaced by a devastating, absolute emptiness. It was the look of a man who realized he was staring at a locked door, to which the key had been thrown into the ocean. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, Cheyenne, please. Get up, Nolan, I commanded, my voice turning to steel. Get up. Walk out of my gallery. And never, ever come near me again. This is the last time you will ever hear my voice. He stayed on his knees for a long time, the silence stretching between us, heavy and final. Finally, the realization that his groveling would yield no comfort seemed to sink into his bones. He slowly, painfully pushed himself off the floor. He didn't look at me again. He turned, a hollow shell of a man, and walked back out into the pouring rain, disappearing into the darkness of the city. I watched the door close behind him. I took a deep breath of the scent of rain and oil paint, turned off the gallery lights, and went home to the man who actually loved me. 3 years later, the Tuscan sun was setting over the rolling hills of the Val d'Orcia, casting everything in a warm, golden, honeyed light. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and aged Chianti. I stood on the stone terrace of a 16th-century villa, looking out over the vineyards. I was wearing a simple, elegant white silk slip dress. My hair was loose, catching the evening breeze. On my left hand rested a band of brushed gold, flanked by a unique, deep blue sapphire. Mrs. Pierce. A deep, warm voice murmured from behind me. Strong arms wrapped around my waist, pulling my back flush against a solid chest. Sebastian rested his chin on my shoulder, pressing a soft kiss to my neck. Mr. Pierce, I smiled, leaning back into his embrace. Are our guests enjoying the wine? Alistair is currently trying to buy the entire vineyard from the owner. Sebastian chuckled, his chest vibrating against my back. And the artists are threatening to paint a mural on the villa walls. So, yes. I'd say the wedding reception is a resounding success. We had married that afternoon in a tiny, crumbling chapel on the estate, surrounded only by 50 of our closest friends, artists, and chosen family. There were no press, no society bloggers, no PR managers curating our vows. It was raw, real, and beautifully ours. Together, Sebastian and I had built an empire that dwarfed the localized wealth of the Braden family. The canvas house now had locations in New York, London, and Tokyo. We didn't just sell art. We dictated the global contemporary market. I was no longer the tragic ex-fiancé. I was Cheyenne Davies Pierce, a titan in my own right. As for Nolan Braden, he had faded into complete obscurity, without the Braden name to shield him, and without my quiet, relentless management behind the scenes. He had proved to be remarkably unremarkable. The last I had heard, through the grapevine of the New York elite, he had moved to a modest condo in the Midwest, working a mid-level management job at a logistics firm. He was unmarried, entirely estranged from his former high society peers, living a life of quiet, suffocating mediocrity. Sometimes, when the nights were quiet and I was sketching in my studio, I thought about that hospital room in my past life. I thought about the slow, agonizing beep of the heart monitor, and the terrifying coldness of dying unloved and unwanted. I realized then that the universe hadn't sent me back to October 14th to punish Nolan Braden. The universe had sent me back to save myself. Revenge is a passive, toxic thing. It requires you to stay chained to the person who hurt you, waiting for their downfall. I hadn't destroyed Nolan. I had simply stepped out of the way and let the immense, crushing weight of his own arrogance and poor choices collapse on top of him. I turned in Sebastian's arms, looking up into the face of a man who saw me as an equal, a partner, and a powerhouse. He brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear, his eyes crinkling at the corners with deep, abiding love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "I was just thinking," I smiled, wrapping my arms around his neck, about how lucky I am that I walked out of that penthouse. Sebastian leaned down, his lips brushing against mine. Their loss, my queen. Their absolute loss. I kissed my husband under the fading Italian sun, the ghosts of my past completely vanquished. My heart beating strong, steady, and finally, undeniably free. What would you do if you were handed a second chance at life? Would you seek revenge? Or would you simply walk away and build a kingdom of your own? Cheyenne's story proves that sometimes the most devastating revenge you can inflict on a toxic person is your own unstoppable success. Leaving Nolan to drown in his own mistakes wasn't just karma, it was survival. If this story of rebirth, betrayal, and ultimate empowerment kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. It helps push these stories to more people who need to hear that walking away is a superpower. Share this with anyone who has ever survived a narcissist. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We have so many more dramatic, real-life reborn stories coming your way. Drop a comment below. Did Nolan get what he deserved? See you in the next one.